just as we begin the meeting, let's please remember that we've got an audience at home. So if I can ask the board members to go ahead and turn on your microphone if you haven't already, that would be fantastic. And then, of course, welcome to our select board people that were able to make it here tonight. We're glad that you're here. And again, please make sure if you're near a microphone that you're pressing the red button and making sure that it's on so that our audience at home can hear everything. Thank you.
So any citizens' comments? And I see none. So the next item is the approval of the minutes.
Adjustments. He's got adjustments.
So I do have one adjustment to the agenda, and it looks a little funny on the agenda, but I'll call it 5C. And it will be an executive session to consider investigation of complaints against a person pursuant to 1 MRSA subsection 4056A. So that will be, we'll call that 6C. As soon as the budget workshop has been completed, we'll go to that item. Okay, that's my only adjustment.
And the second adjustment is Facilities Committee will meet for momentarily after that for a brief update. So, welcome all the boards that appeared. We appreciate it. Now we're off to approval of minutes.
I motion to approve the minutes for March 4th, 2020.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Here we go.
Just reshuffle things a little bit. So we are going to jump right into the budget workshop. So I've been doing things a little bit differently this year. So I'm actually going to give you guys a short presentation. A lot of it is similar to what I've done through the course of this, but I'm going to jump up there, and the slides will be right up there, so that that way you guys have a general overview of where we are, and then we'll talk about the handouts that the board members and you guys have in front of you. So. And again, thank you guys very, very much for being here today, so we can have this discussion moving forward. So it looks like a little bit of a long presentation, but I'm going to move fairly quickly. There will be plenty of time for discussion and questions as we go through. So our goal, we've used it for several years now, but we're going to continue to use that, is promoting student success in all areas as we strive for academic excellence while maintaining fiscal responsibility. So there's some baseline data I just shared with my administrators, directors, managers, etc. I thought it was important that we keep an eye on some of this baseline data. So the first thing that we talked about was student count and how we report it to the Department of Education. So in district count in October, we had 1,139 students that were resident students that came to the Marana Cook area schools, K through 12. The actual count in January, because the state calculates things based on your October 1st count, when we looked in January, when we started our budget process, our actual count at that time was 1,208, and the difference between that can be pretty much attributed to tuition students that come to our district, which that number mathematically comes out to be about 69 students that we have. One of the things that's really important to remember is that enrollments fluctuate quite a bit during the school years. They can go up, they can go down. We can actually have students move out and those same students move back in a short time later. So there is movement throughout the year, but the state works off of what does your October 1st enrollments look like. The other thing that we had to pay attention to is the state of Maine property evaluations. Those went up in all communities at least a little bit. That impacts the subsidy we get. Well, of course, as I just said, enrollments also play a pretty big role in calculation of subsidy. And another piece that's very important for us is our free and reduced population. And we found this year that our free and reduced population actually declined. And we're not sure exactly why. We have a couple of suspicions on why we think that has happened. But typically across the district, it's been in the low 30s, 31-ish%. And this year we were down around 28%. So that does have an impact on funding. Even though it may sound like a small percentage points, it actually does have an impact on us. Some other things that were important as we started the budget season moving forward was the fact that we know there are some big ticket items in our budget. The first one being health and dental insurance. We have to, when we build our budget, we kind of have to estimate what we think that number, that percentage raise is going to be. We tend to go high and then adjust it down so that we don't get caught shorthanded where it comes in high and we've brought it in low. So we tend to go high. We've never had a health insurance increase of over 10%, but it conceivably could be that. But we've been very lucky the last couple of years that it has not come in at 10%. Same with dental. I won't go into that. But one of the things to note there is that increase alone is going to account for a 1.56% increase in the bottom line of the budget. So it is kind of a big ticket item when you take a look at it. The second thing is the bond payment. We were blessed enough to have the endorsement of the bond, but we also know that the bond payment, I'll talk about this a little bit later on, is this first payment, which will be in next year's budget cycle, which is what we're talking about, that alone accounts for a 2.23% increase to our budget. So again, it's another very big ticket item. And then wages and salaries, across the board, that's 1.6% in our budget. One of the things that we had to pay attention to, especially with the teacher contract, is there is a new minimum of $40,000, so we had to work. We have 3 years to get there, which is, thankfully, we had 3 years to get there, but that is kind of the right thing to do, is to start moving us in that direction. So that is a big ticket item in our budget. So that's significant, and we have to acknowledge that right from the get-go as we're planning our budget and moving forward. So I did give the administrative teams, directors, managers some directives. The first one was we were trying to have little to no increase in the overall spending of the budget. The target was about 2%. We still have work to do on that. The second thing was to increase transparency and equity of spending practices. Instructional line spending was based on the number of students in a building, with an extra allocation for Title I schools who need that extra support. The only two schools that get that extra support are Mount Vernon Elementary School and Wayne Elementary School. We also have had a discussion around class sizes, 15 to 20 in the elementary schools, 18 to 22 in the middle schools, and we put a target number there of 10 or more at the high school. Please don't interpret 10 or more to mean that we have just 10 students in a class. We can have classes that have 10 students, but we also have classes at the high school that have 20, 21, 22 students in there. So there's a wide range because high school is kind of different, the way you schedule with the courses they take, et cetera. So please don't get fooled and think we just have 10 students in a class at the high school, because we absolutely do not. We just want to make sure that we do have a minimum of 10 students. And then we also talked about the idea that positions in our district may not automatically be filled. We would have to have discussions about how we need that position filled and what's the best way to do that. Across the board. And we've begun those discussions, and March and April are kind of the magic months where we find out who's leaving and who's staying when it comes to staff in all positions across the district. So we're kind of in that, we're a little bit in flux right now, but we will get clarity on that as we continue to move forward. So having said all of that to you, we have a series of budget presentations where I hear from the different managers, administrators, et cetera. So the next part of this presentation is what we have kind of brought forth to the board. So when it comes to building principals, each individual school budget, there has been no new requests brought forward from the administrators. Their reasons I think are very powerful and make a whole lot of sense here. We recognize that the financial constraints of the budget due to the investment in facilities through the recent bond, they recognize that you guys gave us support for that, so we want to honor that. We also want to honor the board budget goal, knowing that each school has individual wants, but understand the need to examine this budget from a district's perspective, and we will address individual school needs in future budget cycles. Continuing the reasoning, we want the budgeting process to be, we don't, excuse me, want the budgeting process to become contentious between the towns and the district. As part of the administrative team, we have had and will continue to have meetings to discuss the factors that are affecting our budget, and we acknowledge that our end goal has not been reached yet, and respectfully ask for your support in allowing the team to continue their work, which has been ongoing, and you'll see that when we talk about the handouts that are in front of you here. So that was the building administrators. The next department that we'd like to kind of draw your attention to is the technology department. The overall technology budget is down to what's called the MLTI bridge year. And the MLTI bridge year is basically saying that that laptops, and if I misspeak, I told my administrators and managers to correct me because I want to make sure the right information gets out. So the bridge year, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit more, is that the state typically has a 4-year cycle with computers, and they've chosen to extend that by 1 year while they go through their process of what they want to do to continue the MLTI program. So that's basically what the bridge year is we're going to continue with the same computers for 1 extra year. What that means is the 21-22 school year, the technology budget will actually go back up as we enter the new contract for the one-on-one laptops for grades 6 through 12. Networks will also need to be updated in the 21-22 school year. So the bridge year is a 5th year using the current MacBook Air laptops for all teachers and students in grades 6 through 12, and elementary teachers and specialists in grade pre-K through 5 all have MLTI MacBook Airs. We will be buying the laptops for $48 each, and we will pay a yearly fee of $12 to use JAMP, which is the control system that manages what's on the devices. We will not have a regular lease payment this coming year for technology. So that's what that means. So with special education, the number of eligible students has increased since last year. We are having to budget for an out-of-district placement at this time. We've been very fortunate to be able to keep most special ed students in our district. I'll give Mr. Ryan Meserve a lot of credit. He works really hard at trying to make sure we can take care of our students in-house. Very rarely do we have to go to the out-of-district placement. So in order to do so and still meet the overall budget goal, there were positions that were removed that weren't filled in this past year, and those were, an example of that was an educational technician that was included in there. The budget for special education best represents what we know about our special education numbers for next year. However, special education numbers can change depending on who moves in, who moves out, and what level of service that they may need. So that's a really important factor that drives that. Some of the other kind of smaller centers, but are still very important functioning parts of our school, English language learners. So in 2018-2019, we had 6/10 of a teacher working in English language arts, for English language learners. We currently we scaled that back based on the number of students we had. So we went last year from 6/10 to 4/10. And my recommendation is that we stay at that current staffing level. A lot of it is dependent on the number of students who qualify for this service. Yearly, we have somewhere between 2 and 7 students that will qualify for this particular service. So the end result is we are not recommending any changes for the 2021 budget in English language learners lines. Gifted and talented, so the number of students is limited to 10% of the student population. So that means we can stay pretty consistent on what we're doing with the services that we provide. So our staffing is anticipated to remain the same, which is 2.2 full-time teachers that are working, and they work across grades kindergarten through grade 12. So at this point, program costs look to be very comparable from last year going into this year's or the next year's budget. Co- and extracurricular positions, so these are positions, a lot of people will associate the athletic teams and such, but there are other teams that fall into that, our math teams, et cetera, that kind of fall into this. So we're not looking for any new co- or extracurricular positions. However, this line is going to go up approximately $13,000 due to what's been put through the negotiated agreement. So that's really the only cost is due to the negotiated agreement. Transportation is up about $35,000. $25,000 of that is the cost of out-of-district special education transportation. The other part of that is going to go straight to salaries and benefits. Adult education, there's no change, but I do like to point out that last year, Mr. Vost asked for a $12,000 line for his budget for CDL classes to be able to be offered to high school students, and he'd like to continue that. So really there's no change, but he does want to continue that program. He's kind of getting some good liftoff, so to speak, and wants to continue that program, and we'd like to support that. Food service is going to be up approximately $7,000. However, the local share is going to remain the same at $105,000. That's the local share for this particular budget. That will remain the same. The health center that we have here at Maranacook Community High School, there's absolutely no changes. Everything's going to be status quo. Nothing is changing in that particular sector. When it comes to professional development, assessment, and curriculum, our professional development is going to be up a little bit because of the negotiated agreement around the stipend schedule. We have several teachers that do a lot of work for us. That's going to be up approximately a little over $7,000. The assessment line has been reduced by about almost a little over $6,000 due to contracted services. The curriculum line is up $2,000 due to the negotiated agreement. Again, the stipends and the expertise we use from the teachers for that. System administration is going to be up approximately $51,000. And it's due to 3 different things: our ADS financial software, the educational service center that we have with RSU 2 and Winthrop, which we has developed into a really good program, and we're getting good benefits from that. And then salaries and benefits. Again, you kind of sensing a theme with salaries and benefits there. So the big hitter is debt service. Bonds increase of $414,500. That includes 1 principal payment and 2 interest payments in the bond that we recently passed with your help. We also are down a little bit through our lease purchase lines. Part of it's due to the MLTI bridge year, so we're basically saving that, what I talked about in technology, about $85,000. And then Siemens Phase 1 work that we did across several schools, we are going to have that paid off at the end of this year. So again, that's a savings of $128,000 to debt service. And then finally, we're almost at the end. Thank you for your patience. So under facilities and maintenance, we are, at the current time, we are up $119,500 in routine maintenance projects. But I also want to be very honest in saying we are currently working on reducing this amount to get it down to what this current year, current level of this year is. So we are working on that. We're not quite there yet, but I expect we will be able to get there for sure this year. And that brings us to questions and discussion. So we'll kind of open up, and if I can't answer it, I will find somebody who can answer it sitting across from you.
Jay, would you mind addressing a little bit more for us so we can understand the team directive that goes to individuals for the target of 2%? That's not the overall budget target.
That was my overall budget target, is I didn't want the budget to go up by more than 2%.
Including health, bond payment, wages, and salaries?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yes.
That's an important clarification.
Yeah, no.
Jay, I'm curious about the bond, what percentage of that bond money we've accessed, already, and what percentage is left. And as a follow-up to that, if there's some that we haven't spent yet, do we start paying the debt service against the whole amount? Or by the time the first debt payment's due, it will be the whole amount?
Right, yes.
Kind of 3 questions, I
Yeah,
guess.
a bunch of questions. So, by any chance? Okay. I'm actually going to, Bridget is way better with these numbers, so I'm going to let her answer this question, if that's okay.
And I didn't actually bring it with me, but we did just have a meeting last night on this. So we were lucky enough that a lot of the projects came in below what we originally had planned, or what our architects told us they were going to come in at. So we've been able to add some additional projects to that. They've been, approved at the facilities meeting and then approved at the board. Right now, I think we are down to about 890,000 still remaining that has not been committed in the bond. Of that, 378,000, I think, is the contingency on the roof. This roof's going to be done this summer, and so we really, of that 890, we still want to hold off on about another 300 of that, because you never know what you're going to find once you tear the shingles off. Right. So that's where the bond stands right now. We do have 3 years from last October to expend that, so we're really looking at the other needs within the district. As far as we took out the full bond.
Okay.
We received all the money, so we will be making full payments on it.
Okay. Jay, I have one more question as a follow-up. Just a point of curiosity, you mentioned we're kind of on that extra year on the laptops. You said something about a $48 payment.
Yes,
Are we buying the laptop based on the
Yes.
residual value?
Yes.
Okay, so they'll be
that's-
kicking around for
Right,
longer
exactly.
theoretically?
Our plan is to take those laptops at the end of that 5 years and then send them down into the elementary school, because they're still very useful, and we know
Right.
we can get more use out of them.
Okay, good.
Oh, yeah. So the handouts you have in front of you, and again, I'll rely a little bit on Bridget's expertise as we go through this. So the very first page that you're seeing, that's in white, is a breakdown by school of where we are in the budget. So you see Manchester all the way down through, and you can see the various columns go from 1920 to what's proposed for 2021, the change, and then the percent change by each building going across. So if you go down to the very bottom row where it says grand total and follow that across, right now, we are at $1,073,534.92 above where we were last year, which does translate to 5.77%. So we still have some work to do, obviously, and we are going to continue to do that, but that's where we currently stand as of today. So I think that's important for you guys to be able to see at this point. So
the goal is that number is going to be cut by 3.77%.
that's what we're trying to get to. Knock on wood.
Where are we at from the beginning requests? Was it like 8 or 9%? We're down to 5.7? or-
Yeah, this hasn't really changed much since
Okay.
we first started the budget.
We haven't rolled up our sleeves yet, huh?
No, the one thing that has changed is we did go into a oil and diesel contract, and because of of course, we probably should have waited till this week, but we were able to cut $31,000 from the budget for the new contract that we have for oil and diesel for next year.
So
Please,
jumping ahead a little bit to the green sheet, I'm looking at balance forward.
yes.
For 2021. You're looking at a $600,000 number. Is that actually surplus that you anticipate having in reserve at the end of this existing fiscal year?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so it seems to me that you might have some leverage in applying that surplus to get you to your target percentage of overall increase, if that's the way you wanted to use it, unless you have other capital plans that you want earmark a specific percentage of that $600,000. But right out of the gate, my feeling would be if you're not long-term planning encumbered, the nice thing to do would be to figure out a way to knock down use that number to knock down the shares to the town, if that's fiscally possible.
That $600,000 is used to reduce the shares to the town.
So that money is in play after you get done with all of your analysis and so forth to get you to the number, and then that balance would be applied at some level.
Yes, it's already calculated in as one of our revenue streams before I figure out what the towns need to pay.
So the 5.77% already includes that 600,000 being used?
Well, see, expenditures and revenues are calculated differently. The 600,000 is used to make up to the 5.77. What will change is as that 5.77 reduces on the expenditure side, what's going to change is the local dollars down here. The things up above are not going to change. It's the local dollars that will reduce as we reduce the 5.77.
This $600,000 is what you expect to have tied up in the year, just kind of happen because things can be cheaper or whatever. You're not budgeting to have a surplus in the next fiscal year. You're budgeting for zero cash in until at the end of that year. Is that what we're saying?
Okay. The 600,000 is, we know that we ended last year with 400,000 more than what we thought we were going to have. So that's 400,000 of that 600. You always, especially in an $18 million budget, you're going to have some money left over usually, or additional revenues. Our tuition revenues from Fayette are higher this year. And then some, we've had some teacher changeovers and some positions that we've had difficulty filling, like special ed techs. So we know that we're going to have some money left over at the end of this year, too. So we're pretty confident that we'll.
Rule of thumb is so you have room for these uncertainties?
I mean, when I build the budget for next year, I don't build it as if there's going to be money left at the end of next year. It's just the way, you know, how I finally finish up this year based on my expenditures and what additional revenues might come in. So it's never planned to build in well, I do have a contingency, but it's only a $71,000 contingency spread across multiple departments in that budget, so.
One more observation. We spoke of a pretty large item for what was called routine maintenance, and I would just urge you to not put off anything that's going to be more expensive next year. Sometimes things can be put off just fine, other times not. So I would say I'd rather see you be careful about that and not have us in a bigger bill for some of the
Final comment about surplus and use thereof. It's obviously better to finish up the fiscal year in the black, so you don't have to come back to the town to pay an additional number. And given the size of the budget and your projected surplus, I would say that your budget is pretty spot on and works. You're not adding numbers to get by. At least that's my impression of a total budget that you have for this present fiscal year, and you're anticipating a surplus of $600,000. That's pretty good forecasting and budgeting from my perspective.
Thank you.
I have a question that maybe somebody can address regarding our partner that's never in the room, and that's the state of Maine. What are you hearing in terms of, I mean, I know you have a preliminary number, and I'm sure they're doing advisory bulletins or whatever, but are you hearing about any supplemental revenues down the road?
So going into next year, our allocation actually went up $344,000. So if you're looking at that revenue side of it, right at the very top where it says state EPS, we actually had an increase of $344,000 from the state. The other thing that I would draw your attention to is the additional balance forward. We found out for the first time that they actually give they will give you an adjustment based on how many superintendent agreements you have. This district draws people in. People want to come here. So we actually have a a little over $92,000 adjustment that we found out just about a little over a week ago, actually. We found out about it, and that's coming. So we're applying it to next year right away. And that's something we will do continuously now that we know about it.
So you're up around 400,000 on revenues
Yes.
from state
Yes.
sources.
Yeah.
I have a few questions. Bill, is this close enough to the microphone? Because we all know I can just get louder. So I know last year, some folks from Mount Vernon expressed concern about the cost per student for their town versus what I believe this is how I remember it, versus what the tuition rate is. And I see that the tuition rate is still lower than all towns except for Reedfield. Why is that tuition rate lower than the average contribution per student?
Okay, so there's multiple different factors going on. Those tuition rates are set by the state, and they do not include all expenses that are built into a budget. It doesn't include your building expenses and transportation expenses and those types of things. But that's what the state calculates that we can charge for tuition. So those are the tuition rates that we charge for Fayette students or any other student that may want to come here, not on a superintendent's agreement as a tuition.
So that's a maximum.
That's a maximum.
Okay. That's nice that they set it lower than our costs.
Well, and just to let you know, we did, Jay and I went up and met with the Mount Vernon Select Board and
I can vote for that.
Is that why they're not here?
explained, and went through the formula, in quite detail, went through the formula, starting with the ED 279, which is the state funding formula, multi-page sheet. One of the reasons Mount Vernon gets hit so hard is their high valuations. If you look at the top of the screen form,
Yep,
So if you look on the second side, the local dollar calculation,
Yeah.
just so everyone's on the same side.
you'll notice that Mount Vernon's 2019 property valuations for the new year is going to be 251 million. Reed Fields is 274 million. That's only a $23 million difference, but yet Mount Vernon has 200 students less than Reed Field. And so valuation plays such a big role, in the state's mandated required mills that needs to be raised for education, and 50% of the additional local is based on valuation. So that is one of the reasons that our smaller towns with high valuations and low pupil counts have to pay more per pupil in local dollars.
great explanation, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see. I loved your presentation. I had looked at it online before I
good.
came, and I really appreciate that you did that. I think it's really helpful, especially for having on the tape for anybody who's watching. That's really terrific. So I have a couple questions. One is about the increase in teacher pay. I believe the state's funding the increase for the first year or for the first 3 years?
Yeah, so that's a little complicated.
take
Yeah, I
it?
can,
And
Actually-
how will that funding stream play out over 3 years?
In actuality, it is not going to help us at all.
Okay,
They're mandating that you get it up to 40,000 in, 2 more years after this one?
right.
Yeah, 2 more years after this one. Or maybe it's 3 more years after this one.
No, 2.
2 more years after this one. But they set a minimum amount for each year. We're actually slightly above that minimum amount as we're going forward in this. So we will not receive any additional funding from the state for the minimum teacher salary requirement.
because your negotiated contract was already meeting that minimum requirement.
Yeah,
Which
because
means-
they ramped it up a little bit each year, so we were meeting that minimum requirement.
Okay, and all of your other steps, I assume, are in relation to that low step?
Yeah.
Okay.
Aroostook County.
In your out years of the contract, will there be some state level of compensation, or are we?
No,
We're done.
no,
It was a first-year thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what year are you on your contract?
We're on our first year
Of,
of the
3-year
3 years.
contract.
3 year?
Okay, so thank you, Ralph, for my second part of the question. So the local, not local, the state food shaming law that was passed, I think you guys already have that one pretty under control because we have a high proportion. I mean, most districts fund $0 from local budget, and we have 105,000. So does that mean that we don't have students who owe lunch bills then at the end of the year?
No,
no.
no,
We do still have students who owe.
yeah.
And will that come out of the budget, or is that something that you take strong collection procedures with, or?
Yeah, we're still working on that. Last year, I think we ended the year with about a $2,000 balance.
That's
Yeah.
nothing. That's nothing.
That's
I mean,
nothing.
Truly.
But most school districts are seeing that their debts increase because people are feeling they don't need to pay it anymore. So we will be analyzing that as we get closer to the year.
I
End of the year.
talked to another superintendent in another district the other day, and he was already $30,000 in the hole, more than he was the year before. So it is going to be, I think it's an unintended consequence of people thinking, oh, I don't have to pay take care of my child's lunch bill, which is sad, but
Right.
we're going to keep feeding them.
That's good. No, I love what you do here with the lunch program. I think,
But I do want to mention that we've had multiple people this year give us donations towards student food service accounts to help us pay those. I mean, they haven't always been large, but $200 here, $300 there. I mean, we have had multiple people give us donations towards it.
it's nice to have local heroes. I think my last question, so we increased for the bond about $414,000. The Siemens got paid off at $128,000. The computers have gone down, I didn't do the math, but about 140,000. Do you have plans for going with Apple after the bridge year? Are you just going to look at going with whatever the state offers? So I guess what I'm looking at is, are you looking to probably go back up to that $214,000 level?
So we have to wait and see what the state puts forward for possible solutions to it. One of the reasons why they're giving it or doing this bridge year is because they don't have a plan yet. So that's something that we will be talking about and trying to evaluate the options once they come forward. Diana, is that a safe answer?
So the plan is to stay 1-to-1 for, is it 6 through 12?
6 through 12, yeah.
That now?
Yeah.
And then when you take the newly purchased 5-year-old computers to the elementary school, would they be staying in-house rather than transporting home? Would that be the plan?
Yeah, right now, that's the plan, yeah.
They'll last a lot longer that way.
Yes. We want to take care of them.
That's great. So there will be a sizable increase next year based off of this budget, just because there will be some 1-to-1 cost put back
Yes.
in. I guess I have one last one, sorry, Ray.
And I'll try not to ask it for you.
I tried really hard not to ask many things tonight. So is that bond payment expected to be fairly level? Are we looking at about $400,000 per year for the life of the bond?
Okay, so our principal is level every year. The interest goes down. So this next year is the highest payment year. The 414 is actually, the payment is actually higher than that because we had budgeted $90,000 this year to make our first interest payment. Okay, so the 414 is the increase above the 90 for next year. So it's a little over 500,000 for next year. But that is the highest payment. They go down every year. Even though the principal stays the same, the interest goes down every year. So for the
So
next
it'll
14 years after that, it will decrease each year.
So it will still be at least 400 because
Yes.
of the 90 that you already had in?
Mhm.
Okay.
So we did include in the very back, there's a couple things I'll just draw your attention to. But we did include a couple things at the back. The very last page is the state subsidy by town. We just wanted you guys to see how much the state is actually kicking in per town. So we get a little over $4 million from the state total, and then you can see by towns how that's kind of gets broken down. One of the things that I do want to point out, I know when you're looking at a $19 million budget, 34,000 is a very small drop in the bucket, but for the first time, Wayne is actually going to get a small chunk from the state. It's all, just barely 30, just a little over 34,000, but it's 34,000 more than we got last year. Usually Wayne is a zero receiver.
Right.
So the fact that we're at least getting a little something, I have a little bit of hope. So I did want to point that out to you guys and just give you that so you could see kind of what was going on there. Also on the front page, on the very back, we do have on the green local sheet, you see the amount per student, which is, if you look at the column on the green page, the row on the green page, that's near the bottom, it says October 1st enrollment by town, and then local money contributed per student. We do have it broken down per student, and that's K-12. But we thought it might be interesting for you guys to see on the back of that first page, what we did is we actually broke it down by school so that you could see the costs that go into what the per pupil cost is by school. And
Okay. The amount on the green sheet is local dollars raised per pupil. The amount on the back of the white sheet is expenditures per pupil by school. So they're a little bit different, but,
And that's why I keep Bridget close by.
And tell me again what the green one was?
the green one is local dollars raised per
Raised.
pupil.
Thank you. Right.
Can I ask a question about census count? If I understood it correctly, you do that in October?
Yes.
but the number is always in play. Uh, This is probably all driven by state statute. Is that the most desirable way to do it? Or if you had your druthers, would you count once early on in the year and once a little bit later and average the two? You would get a much more representative number that way, wouldn't you?
Yes. Years ago, the state used to take an October 1st and an April 1st enrollment, but they've done away with the April 1st enrollment, so
Why was that?
I don't know. Also, as far as the additional local dollars to be raised, it's written right into our consolidation plan, reorganization plan, that we have to use the October 1st enrollments, so.
That's the hard and fast number, and if your count goes up after October 1st, well, you lucked out.
No. The one thing I will tell you, as far as the additional local, even though we use October 1st, it's on a 3-year rolling average. So we do average it over 3 years, so it changes.
So nobody takes a really extreme hit in the first year of some really unplanned growth.
Yeah. Even the state,
That's a mitigating
yeah.
circumstance.
Yeah, even the state on their required amount does an average of more than 1 year.
And I'm going to get myself in a little trouble here, but I would like, if the board is willing to comment. You were talking about the impact of property values on Mount Vernon's share, even with a basically low percentage share of student count. If you had your druthers, would you move to a situation where apportioned town shares were based on the actual number of students in a given year, and that cost is your share? Because grand list, in my mind, and I have an agenda here, full disclosure, is very subjective, and it doesn't appear to me to be fair in terms of actual apportioning of cost. Have you guys thought about that? And if you have, do you have a position, and as an association of boards of education, do you present that point of view to hopefully get some legislators' opinions?
Yeah, we have I have one. And that is, if you look at I presume they have this page.
Yes.
Yep.
If you look at that page, you can see what happens at the cost per school. I asked them to look at each school and the cost per pupil. And that's what is exposed here on this page. And you can see Reedfield gets like 14, almost 15,000, where Mount Vernon is 17.6, and Wayne is 17.3, and it's all over. But the board can do nothing unless somebody gets Manchester to get all the people on this board to look at this, because it requires a full board to be present from all towns to even make that adjustment that you're talking about. But that is the reason why I asked for this here document, to point that out, the difference. Because what you're talking about is totally correct.
But there are a lot of moving parts in these numbers.
There's a lot of
Because
moving parts.
there's two Title I schools,
Right.
and, I mean, you could have an average class size at Reedfield of 19 and an average class size in Mount Vernon of 1, but because you don't move students between elementary schools, you can never.
Right.
I mean, when I was on this school board,
Yeah.
the thing that always irritated me was when there was a half a fifth grade in Wayne, and I had 1.5 fifth grades in Reedfield, where I served on the school board, and we could do nothing about that. And of course, you don't want to move students for 1 year. But again, and this kind of goes back to something I mentioned last year, I really would like to see a plan for your elementary schools developed 5-10 years out. I mean, I think there needs to be a vision for that.
So
As you know, I would like to see a combined school. I've mentioned that before.
So let me tell you what I've done so far. I've produced a paper, a white paper, I don't have it with me. But I asked for 10 years out, because if you don't look 10 years out, you're not prepared for writing any bond to build a school, to do anything. And when you look at the costs that we run for these elementary schools, and what a town would have to pay if they brought their child in, you're almost double. You know, it doesn't add up to me. And you have to think long-term, but if you're not prepared, but guess how many comments I got back? I got one comment from a board member to add one additional person to the committee. End of story, nobody willing to do anything. My teachers, my administrators, anybody. And I just it's frustrated. Because what you're talking about, to me, is we got to look at this equity. And how, because if we don't plan ahead, our children are never going to be ready for the workforce. And I don't feel our children are totally ready for the workforce. Industrial arts is not taught to any extent. And people that don't know how to use their hands when they get out of here, when I got out of high school, I knew how to use my hands. I knew how to make money. I knew where the debt was and how much that impacted my family. I could tell you how fast I could pay it off and what I could do. And I bet you if I sat down, most of the kids in this school could not do that. That's sad.
Mr. Cohen, I would disagree. I'm sorry, I would disagree.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You can disagree all you want. But I do think people need to know how to use their hands. You can agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, I think kids know how to use their hands, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So what I think I heard you say was that from your white paper research, 10 years out, we were looking at a doubled cost? Is that what you said?
No, what I was looking for was comments, sort of like what this gentleman's asking about, to consider so that there would be fairness, that people would understand the debt part of this whole thing. Because when we send kids out and they automatically accumulate all this debt and they can't use it, or they fail at college. There's so many failures at college, it's unreal. And it's sad. There shouldn't be there. We could help them, you know what I'm saying? More at this level.
So is the conversation that you were asking about, Bruce, is basically consolidating our local schools into something other than 4? And seeing what that cost structure would be, and
I think it's a huge due diligence project that should be undertaken. And I've urged that we look at that in the past. I don't necessarily think that's the solution that may work, but I think theoretically it does. And I'd like to see some due diligence on it at some point. But I'm not here to start that or argue with the board in regards to that. But just again, to plant that, if you will, conceptual need.
Yeah, I think it would be a good exercise. I think if it's documented and publicized, it's not a threat. I mean, if all of a sudden people are, oh my God, we're going to close down Mount Vernon or Wayne or whatever. But if they know that you're just doing a what-if exercise, what if we did this and present some options looking in that 10-year window? I think, I agree with Bruce, it would be a very good exercise to do. And if we get to the point where we feel like we have to do that, there's already been a lot of, talk about it. It's not all of a sudden. So yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't, spending this much money, look at a 10-year plan like that.
With the primary goal of that exercise being that you arrive at some funding equity in terms of if you have 200 kids in the system and it's X number of dollars a year per kid, then that's your share. You take the subjective element of grand list value off the table. And there's going to be a difficulty from my perspective in terms of towns that don't have grand list strength to pay maybe that shifted cost per student. And that's why the system is what it is right now. But that's why you have a state government that's supposed to be responsible and hold these towns harmless so that the property taxpayers in quote-unquote wealthy towns don't pay more than their actual fair share.
Question on that? The notion that the grand lists are, what you said, a little
They're always in flux.
influx is probably true, but don't we base all these things on the state valuations, which are a separate system? And then the question is, are those objective or not? And I can't tell you the answer because I don't know the details, but our local grand lists are not what drives these equations, am I right?
These are all state valuations. And then there's two sides of it. There's the, if you're looking at the, the horizontal side here, the first section that's bolded, that's what the state mandates each town raise, and that is based on valuation, and that's their formula of state valuation. But that's their formula. They're mandating that each town raise that amount. We can't change that here. The other part of the formula is what's written into our consolidation plan, and 50% of that is based on per pupil on a 3-year rolling average, and 50% of that is based on valuation, state valuation on a 3-year rolling average. But we have no say over individually as our school district on how the state mandates what we raise.
But you could look at that other part that's in the consolidation agreement.
We can, but there is a whole process in that
Right.
consolidation agreement that has to be followed in order for that to be looked at, yes.
We need a full board to do that.
I think the important thing looking forward is trying to be fair to both sides, to the municipal side and to the school district side. And I know there are some towns of the 4 of us that are having a much harder time doing that because they have low student populations. And so they're foregoing a lot of municipal needs to pay the school budget rather than raising taxes more than they are already. And it's not that, I don't think any town here begrudges what we spend for the school, nor what we spend for municipalities. But I think going forward, as we know, Maine's already the oldest population age in the country. I don't see that trend changing right now, and I don't think the situation is going to get any easier. So I think if the board could look at alternatives, whether it's what we were discussing tonight or others, I think that would make sense so that there is an option that people can go to and discuss. But I certainly agree, as I think you stated, it has to be done in a completely transparent way that says we are not talking about doing this now. We are not talking about closing any school out of the 6 that we have. This is just planning.
Right.
And planning's responsible. And I think if you do it that way, I think people will become much more agreeable because at least they see there's a plan. And then they might say, we hate your plan, don't do that. But at least there was a plan. When
They
there's
have an
no
option.
plan,
They have an
people become very suspicious of, well, why isn't there a plan?
Yeah, I'll add one last thing on that. Well, I don't know if it's last for me. And actually, I'm going to then shift to another comment. Maybe that'll change the direction of the discussion. My thinking about a singular elementary school isn't just to have one boiler to heat the building, to keep students warm, or have one food service. I think there's a lot more you can do educationally in one building. There's probably a lot more you can do in terms of managing student-teacher ratio. There's probably a lot of time that's traveled between school districts, and there's some administration, although I never actually begrudge administration. And I know that's a very popular thing to punch, but you need experts and you need people to manage people and so forth. But you could probably have, in describing what that would look like, you want to describe what that environment would deliver for the district. I think that's very important. And so in my shifting gears, I want to go back to FY-21 and just say that I think your overall goal, your overarching goal is laudable. I think it's very responsible. I'm not hearing from people I know who work at the school or whatever, at least at this point, that it's abandoning your goal or compromising your goal, and I don't think you would want to do that. So congratulations. I think the first initial steps really look very positive, and we've always, as several people said here, been very supportive, and we think having this school district here is actually an important attractant, if you will, to people to move here. That's why I moved here, actually, and built a home. So you've done a good job so far, but I know you got a lot of heavy lifting ahead, and anything we can do to support you, I hope you'll ask us.
Thank you.
A couple observations. I think it was properly explained, as we mentioned, an effort to look at these issues, what-if analysis sense, and from a 10-year timeline sense. People that support that. At least I personally, I do get nervous when I hear people use the word equity without a precise definition of what we mean by equity. And I'm always asking, what do you mean by equity? Might not be the same things I mean, might be not the same things Gary Carr says, thinks is equity, but be very precise about what it is. And it strikes me, you're very busy, you have a lot of work to do, you put in a lot of time. And from the standpoint of trying to get something that can be perceived as effective, this may be the kind of thing that you can done by the University of Southern Maine or Warnell or even a private firm that could come in here with a sense of that we're here. We have no horse in this race. We are not answerables. We're not going to go opposite anywhere. And we have no previous position on some of these things, and we think we can maybe be more objective. Somebody who doesn't live in any of these towns, that would cost something. It may be that the opportunity for some funding for it. But like Sarah said, was out of their belongs too. We in our town have a number of pretty significant infrastructure needs that we can't put off forever. You know what one of them is. And we're appreciating having a little more time to face that. And so all of these things are moving up roads, schools, and our infrastructure. If we had everything behind us, it would be a little bit different for us, but they're ahead of us. So that's all I have to offer for them.
I don't personally see how you're going to get down to your 2% goal.
Wish you all the best.
But if you're working towards something less, that's great. But I agree with what Lloyd said earlier. Some things with maintenance just become worse and more expensive. Other things you can live without. So, good luck.
Thank you.
Any
Thank you.
further comments?
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, guys.
Very, very much. I appreciate you all being here and sharing your thoughts.
Well, thank you for having us. Most districts don't do that.
Yes, you're right.
You're always welcome.
Is that, okay. Yeah, we're going to go out.
So a budget deliberation follow-up?
Yep. It's up to you.
Anybody on the board that want to talk any more about the budget? I see none.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to enter executive session to consider investigation of complaints against a person pursuant to 1 MRSA subsection 4056A.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
So we'll be going over to the conference room, they call it, down the hall near the health center. And if you guys want to shut off your microphones, or make